Right, Chris, without any further ado, can you hear us?
I can hear both you guys loud and clear.
All right. Very, very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, not a problem at all. In fact, I'll tell you, I don't mean to rub it into anyone who's listening from their home or during rainy weather, but right now I'm on the bow of a 50-foot yacht in Vancouver Harbor on a boat full of girls, frankly. And so if you hear high-pitched squealing in the background, I'm not on a pig farm. I'm actually on a yacht, and there's people are having fun in the background. So I apologize for any background noise, but try and put it in context and have fun.
Oh no, hey, we're glad that you're able to take some time out of your leisurous activities to join us here on the show.
I swear, I feel like Ric Flair.
Yeah. Such a rough day you're having. It sounds like.
Oh, not that I don't like doing radio, but you guys, come on now, don't try my patience.
Well, right on. Well, we thank you. We thank you for joining us here, and we actually we want to kind of start out a little bit by giving why don't you give us a little backstory as far as I guess a good place to start would be what made you want to become a wrestler, I guess.
I've been wrestling a long time. It's longer than I think a lot of people realize. I started back in the late 80s. And back then, wrestling was it was a completely different animal. It was still a business that was very much shrouded in secrecy, and it hadn't kind of come out of the closet, so to speak. And so it was a completely different world, and I was absolutely intrigued by it. In high school, I can remember taking acting classes, and of course I was on the wrestling team, and I kind of did everything I could in furtherance of becoming a pro wrestler as an adult. And so it was this childhood dream that I just never dropped. So I kept pursuing it, and then as soon as I got out of grade 12, I went to Al Tomko's wrestling school, which is was kind of a product of All-Star Wrestling here on the West Coast. And they used to run it every summer, and there was about 20 guys that went out for this wrestling school. And at the end of the summer, there was, I think this is pretty typical for a wrestling school too, there were 3 guys left because they just literally kicked the crap out of us. And then by the end of the first year, really there was only 2 guys left, and those 2 were myself and Iron Mike Roselli. I'm not sure if you guys remember him, but he's done a lot of work on the West Coast as well.
Mike Roselli, would it be the same Mike Roselli that takes part actually in the movie with you?
That's right, yeah. That's right. He kind of plays the holier-than-thou kind of asshole character. That's Tyler's kind of lifelong friend.
Yeah. Well, that's
Steve Justice.
Steve Justice, yes, exactly. That's great that you guys were able to play into that, and I think that kind of comes across in the movie, which we'll get to later. The chemistry between you guys really did seem like you had known each other for quite a long time.
Oh, sure, and we have. We've wrestled together kind of up and down the West Coast and in Japan, and we've both had kind of long careers. I mean, it's almost 20 years now. We've been wrestling and still going, although Mike, I should say, is doing more stunts now than anything else. I think he tries to keep the wrestling to a minimum, to avoid injury. But I wrestled a lot in your neck of the woods for guys like Sandy Barr and the Kaforis, and I think all the territories have one thing in common over the last 20 years, and that's lots and lots of change and lots of different promoters and everyone kind of fighting an uphill battle, really.
Yeah. So you mentioned so All-Star Wrestling was the promotion that you originally started out with. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And again, back then that was back when All-Star Wrestling was making money, and they were doing kind of 6 shows a week all over BC and Washington. And so I was very lucky in a way, because my first 2 years of wrestling, I must have wrestled 300 shows a year. And of course back then that was quite normal. In fact you had to, because wrestling was your career. And if you're only making $5 or $7.5 a night, you need all those dates. So I got a lot of wrestling early, and that really helped me. Obviously, it helped me later on. It gave me kind of an advantage over a lot of other wrestlers that broke in, say, 5 years later. Because I think, as you guys know now, you're kind of looking at really, really, really busy guys are doing 100 dates a year, most people are doing a lot less.
Yeah, it definitely seems like, especially on the market as far as the territories go, it's really hard for a lot of them to keep up and running nowadays.
Sure, and it's funny. I think it's something it's not really debated enough these days, and that's, to me, like what is it that's changed? In particular, what is it that changed 15 years ago that really kind of changed the business in many ways for the worse, especially from the territory's perspective? And I really don't know the answer to that question. I mean, but it's certainly a fun one to debate. What do you guys think? Have you guys ever thought about this or talked about it?
Chris, why don't you go ahead and take that?
Honestly, obviously the McMahon's expansion, I think, played a really big part in it, and it certainly didn't help matters when Turner joined the national ranks. So then you had two national promotions running against each other, swallowing up any and every bit of talent they could find, and it's
sure.
It's hard to run, even on a local syndicated network. It's hard to run a show when people are like, hey, why watch a local show when I could watch the alternative?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Like, you used to, back when I first started wrestling, like, you didn't see main events ever on TV. Even with New York, you would see, I remember this show came out called Saturday Night's Main Event. I don't know if you remember that one.
Oh, yeah.
And it was on once every, 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And it was a show that you would literally wait for on pins and needles because it was the only time you'd see a name against a name, unless you went to see it live.
Yeah.
And somehow, I don't know whether, maybe they're making a lot more money now with pay-per-views, et cetera, but it seemed like the business as a whole was kind of just healthier, from New York to the independents, when they did the old formula, which was jobbers on TV, build up your names, make everybody wait, and then make them pay to go and see them wrestle each other.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, a lot of the time, I know from growing up in that era, I mean, I think the first live events I ever went to, I was probably about 4 years old. And at that time, they were running with the method of having the A, B, and C towns, where they would kind of break everybody up. And, you'd see some pretty good names, come through the small little town I lived in at the time. And,
yeah.
Some of the bigger areas up in Portland, would have some of the bigger stars as well. But yeah, that's
right.
That's really interesting how that all kind of has just radically changed over the course of time.
Right, and so long story short, back in my early years, I can remember going on the road, and we'd go to these northern towns like Stewart, BC, and Kitwanga. I mean, towns you never heard of that have population 3,000, and we'd have 750 turn out for the show. So it was a great experience. I mean, we had these, what I think today would be considered a huge, wildly successful indie show. We had those every night, 6 nights a week for 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And Al Tomko was making money.
So that was Al Tomko and the All-Star Wrestling. Of course, you had mentioned how you were wrestling pretty much every single night.
Yeah.
The first few years. At what point do you think that actually changed? I mean, can you pinpoint that, or?
No, I think you guys may have hit the nail on the head. I think the wrestling market started to get pretty flooded. And I think indies lost a lot of their talent, and indies started wrestling differently. The matches were not that I'm a big proponent of old school, but I'm a big proponent of elements of old school wrestling, and those elements being the classic storytelling and the entertainment factor. I think a lot of that has kind of gotten lost over the years, and I think it's cost us, in the long run. I really do.
It's kind of become less about ring psychology and more about high spots.
Sure. Yeah, and one thing they used to do is interviews used to be a kind of a rare thing for a wrestler. And they only put guys who are really good on the stick in front of the camera, of course. But they use the commentators. You can remember the old Vince McMahon, Jesse Ventura combo. They used to use the commentators to pitch the angles. right? So the guys would be wrestling in the ring and wrestling their jobber, or every now and again you'd see a decent match, and the commentators were basically pitching the angle to the public. Well, now it's totally different. You know, they basically, it's like a soap opera. I mean, they show backstage stuff. They actually try and kind of play amateur filmmaker and film the whole story and leave nothing to the imagination. And I think that's a big negative development.
Oh, absolutely. I think it kind of overexposed things in quite a way that, you know, and then once you spoil the audience to that degree, I mean, that seems to be typically what they want. So,
yeah, I think I caught on TV. I think it was last night. Wasn't there a cage match with Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio, and it was like a loser? If Rey Mysterio lost, he was going to lose his mask. Wasn't that last night?
Yeah, I think. Well, it was actually. I think it was some sort of a. I think it was like a 4-way cage match between.
That's right.
Yeah, between a bunch of their top names.
And I caught a little bit of this, and I was watching it, and I don't watch the show all that regularly, but I was thinking to myself, wow, like this is an enormous match.
Yeah.
Like I can't believe I'm watching this on TV. It just didn't make any sense to me at all.
For free, nonetheless, you know.
Yeah. So then, how are you going to come back as an indie and do your loser leaves town match? I mean, it's just not going to compare.
So we have that. You of course explained about the years in our All-Star Wrestling. What was the next promotion that you ended up working for after that?
Well, there's Vancouver itself has probably had 7 or 8 different promotions over the last 10 years. Michelle Starr has been running had been running ECCW, and I would have to say that's probably one of the more successful kind of recent history promotions. They've been running for I think about 12 or 13 years now, and they've done well, and they're doing well now. They've got Scotty Mack kind of running their book, and he's a gifted athlete as well as a heck of a good guy. So I think he's doing a really good job kind of keeping it going. And I've done a lot of work for ECCW over the years, and then obviously we used to go down and wrestle for Sandy Barr every Saturday for his TV spot. We did that for a better part of a couple of years, I think.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting that you mention Sandy Barr and that whole operation there out of Portland, because to me that was one of the biggest. I remember hearing stories about just how great Portland wrestling was, and how so many names came out of that territory, and
yes.
and it's basically like non-existent now. I mean, you have a couple smaller promotions down in this area, but it's completely nothing like it used to be.
Portland was a hotbed, from that Roseland Theater. I mean, you just had some unbelievable names come out of there for a long, long time. And you're right, like it basically kind of ended like a trip hammer.
Yeah.
And there really hasn't been anything decent, since, a couple of blips here and there. But it's too bad because, and maybe that's a good, if you're really trying to figure out what happened to wrestling in general, maybe that's the territory you really got to look at. What was it that brought the development of wrestling in Portland to a really, sudden stop?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it has a lot to do, like with what Chris mentioned earlier, about the expansion and the fact that, all those bigger companies were basically East Coast based. Seems
right.
like we don't get a lot of love out here on the West Coast anymore as far as wrestling goes.
I think one of the last big names to come out of there was a guy I used to pal around with here when he was in All-Star, was that Scotty the Body, or Raven.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, and I remember watching him, when he left Vancouver. He and I used to hang out on the road, and he tried to convince me to come down to Portland, and by that time I was busy with law school aspirations, so I didn't go. But I remember watching him, and he was great on that show, and that show was it was just a great little format. I remember thinking, wow, I wish we had something like that in Vancouver,
Yeah, absolutely. I also, as far as you mentioned, going and doing the work for Portland and all around as well, I actually was reading up on here that at one point, I don't know, like maybe about 10 years in or so, and like you had just mentioned just now, you had made the decision to go to law school and this and that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. I was actually down there. I was wrestling. I can't remember whose show it was, but Superfly was on the show. And he was. So I'm having a conversation with Jim in the dressing room, and I forget how we got on the subject, but we were talking about careers and school and all that stuff. And I was trying to decide whether I should kind of keep my schooling going, because I had been doing it on the side, but I couldn't figure out whether I was more serious about wrestling or school, and it was a big dilemma for me. And I remember having this chat with him, and you gotta, like, me having a chat with Jimmy the Superfly Snuka. I mean, even though I'd been wrestling a few years at that point, I'm still marking out. This is a guy who I would aspire to one day. I would dream of being as successful as he was in the business that I love. He was, aside from maybe Hulk Hogan, at that time, he was kind of number 2 all time of everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy's talking to me, and he had his run, and it was kind of over, and he was aging quickly. And, I'll never forget that he had this look in his eyes, like almost like if he could do it over again, he would hedge his bets, or he would do something else. Like he just had kind of no prospects going forward other than wrestling some of these indie shows, and then maybe kind of mall security, or just trying to scrape something together to keep himself busy for the rest of his life. And he still had half of his life to live at that point. That's kind of the sobering thing you all realize when you hit the age of 38, 39, 40. You think, God, I've got half my life in front of me. And I was deeply affected by this conversation I had with him, like deeply affected. I remember I went home from that road trip and decided, come hell or high water, I'm gonna get this law degree. I'm gonna have something for the second half of my life.
Yeah. And so you went ahead and it's really nice to have the fact that you actually are thankful that you realize that, to potentially have something that would prolong your enjoyment of life further than wrestling, because you really don't know how long the timetable is for such things.
Well, absolutely, and I think it's healthy. Like, you've got to have. I see a lot of newcomers to the business, and they're absolutely kind of driven and focused on wrestling, and of course that's a good thing. But I think it's healthy to have other things in your life, and I think if having other kind of areas of expertise, or having school going on the side, or having a kind of a significant job going on, I think that only helps your wrestling career, because it gives you perspective.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen a lot of guys buried in wrestling, and they kind of lose the forest for the trees. They kind of stop realizing what it is that makes people cheer and boo, and they're just too wrestling focused. You need to have some external things going on.
Oh, absolutely.
I sound like a goddamn psychiatrist.
So, Chris, you have anything you want to add to any of that?
No, I was enjoying listening.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris. You're a hell of a color man.
I know. I do what I can.
Well,
so just to give you the kind of the brief rest of things, I went back to law school, and I found out I was a bit of an idiot savant when it came to law. I was, just happened to be good at it, so did well, and I ended up clerking at the Supreme Court of Canada in Ottawa, and working in New York City for this juggernaut law firm. For, I guess it was almost 2 years I was down there, and so it took basically a 2-year hiatus from wrestling, just because I was New York lawyer, so working the old 100-hour weeks.
Wow.
And then kind of, once I made a bunch of money and kind of satisfied my need to read, so to speak, I got out of there and came back here, and we made Kayfabe.
Wow. So yeah, that's a great kind of segue into doing that, because Chris and I became huge fans of this movie. I actually discovered it while visiting one of our old faithful websites, WrestleCraft.com.
Oh yeah, okay.
And R.D. Reynolds was just plugging the hell out of it, saying, you got to see this movie, you got to see this movie. So by any means necessary, of course, Chris and I were able to get our hands on copies. And
did you order it, or did you copy it?
We actually
you can tell me.
We received it from an unknown source that would rather remain nameless.
Fair enough.
We've experienced this movie. We've loved this movie. Anyone that hasn't seen this movie, I cannot stress. If you're a wrestling fan, even if you're not a wrestling fan, of course, you have to be a fan if you're listening to our show right now. So that's kind of pointless, but
all of you non-wrestling fans listening right now,
yeah.
Go and get the movie.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about Kayfabe, the movie, and so kind of give us a little backstory on how this all came about.
Well, I used to, so I made it essentially with a law buddy of mine named Mike Raven and a friend of his named Mike Scully, and we, I used to get back from road trips that I would take locally here and hanging out with some lawyer buddies, and I would tell these wrestling road trip stories because, anyone that's involved in the business or that's ever been on a road trip or even heard about a lot of road trips realizes that this stuff is stranger than fiction. So you can imagine a room full of lawyers, telling them about some road trip you've taken and some of the, shit that we got up to kind of after the show, during the show, all the ribs, you try and tell them these stories and they look at you like you're a liar, of course, and they don't realize you're toning it down so that they might believe you. So I used to tell these guys these stories, and they used to always get a kick out of them. They would be laughing our heads off, and Mike Raven, I think it was, one day said, God, you guys, we have to write a script that tells some of these stories, some of these ridiculous stories. Like we've got to put this down on paper and make a movie out of it. And it was classic drunk talk. That was several years ago, and we kind of kept bringing it up. And one day, we just decided that's it. Like, we're either going to make this movie or we're going to regret having not made it 20 years from now. So we sat down, we wrote the script. We basically put some, I think it was about $50,000 together, which was our total budget for the movie. And we started going through the motions. We started booking locations. One thing we did that really made the difference at the end of the day is most of our budget went to paying guys who knew what they were doing. And we're not film guys. I'm a wrestling guy and the other guys are lawyers. We knew how to write a script and we knew what we thought was funny. But when it came to actually filming something, I think you've got to realize what you don't know how to do. And so we hired a cinematographer, we hired a sound production guy, we hired an editor, we hired a couple of lighting guys. We basically had all the key elements in place, and these guys knew what they were doing. So we told them what we wanted to say, and they helped us say it. And that's, if any aspiring filmmakers out there, anyone thinking of making their own film and doing it on the cheap, it can be done. But God, there's certain key critical guys you have to hire, and you have to let them basically do their job.
Yeah, not necessarily as much. Of course, what you explained is more of the production end of things, because you guys, from what I can tell, as far as the cast goes, most of those guys are, actual real wrestlers.
That's right. I'd say a little more than half are actual wrestlers, and then there's about half that are actors that we had to kind of teach how to wrestle.
Yeah.
So we did that on purpose. We wanted there to be a mix. Like, we wanted legitimate actors because, of course, they're going to be better on screen and they're going to have a better presence. And then we also kind of got the wrestlers that we thought would be able to pull off certain characters perfectly. And I think we nailed it. We got really lucky. Guys like Kurt Sterling, as the rookie. He's not necessarily a gifted actor, but man, he really knew the rookie, and I thought he did just a marvelous job. Kind of pulling off that kind of shy and not sure of yourself, kind of character.
Oh yeah.
And Steve Justice, that Mike Roselli character. I mean, it was just Steve Justice is something that comes naturally to him. So he could do the part without having to work at it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
I honestly thought Steve Justice was a huge riot. I think he was, to me, was one of the funnier parts of the movie. Just any like one of the standout scenes to me. Well, for me, a lot of it was his facial expressions, and especially like he was having the discussion with Casa Supernova, and he's all like, "So your name is Casa Supernova? That's Spanish." And just kind of like leading him on, kind of preparing him to be like, "So, this is, what are you even talking about?" It was mostly like his facial expression. He nailed it.
And that's Mike Roselli. Like he's a self-admitted asshole, and that's so it comes naturally to him. Like he lives to kind of rib the new guy and make people in the locker room that aren't veterans feel uncomfortable, and that's something he's done his whole life, So he, we asked him to play this role, and I remember one day on set he kind of said, "Hey, Tyler, is Steve Justice based on me?" And I said, and I couldn't hide it. I said, "Yes, Mike, he's based on you, but you're nicer." And he just kind of smiled and said, "Yeah, I thought so."
Well, it was a perfect role fit for the perfect guy to do it, obviously. Yeah, I mean, the Justice character, and like I said before, the chemistry between you two, it really does make sense, that you guys had known each other for so long. You just, you get that feeling, when you guys are having those locker room conversations and this and that, it really comes across as very, very natural. I just thought, wow, this.
I'm glad, and the truth is we've had those conversations, so that's probably why. This movie is, for anyone who watches it, keep in mind that we almost said at the beginning, the following is a true story. Because it is. Everything that happened in that movie happened in a Vancouver promotion sometime over the last 10 years.
Wow.
So although we decided not to say that because, obviously, if you see the movie, you'll see that some of it's just utterly ridiculous, and you might not believe that real people would do these things, right?
So you brought up an interesting point, and I think it might be a nice time to kind of give a little spotlight on some special, maybe it's something that relates to the movie, or maybe it's something that you guys didn't get to use or what have you. But as far as road stories that stand out, do you have a couple you could maybe run across us?
Sure. God, there's so many, but there's one that I love, which is, are you guys familiar with Travis Waters? He wrestles with the Ladies' Choice.
Yeah, he's the Marco Pade character in the movie, correct?
Right, that's correct. He plays two characters. Can you think what the other one is?
And you just answered my $1 million question. Chris and I had been talking about this, and we're like, you know what? We're like, I'm pretty sure that Al Thompson is Marco Payne as well, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So Travis Waters, being a gifted actor, and he is.
Yeah.
He did both characters.
Wow.
We had Al Thompson, of course. We did a wig, and we did a kind of a fat suit for him, and we actually had a special effects guy who was very experienced, who basically worked for free. So we're very lucky, and he did the gaffing scene with Lupachuk, which I think came off just beautifully. And then he also did the special effects for Al Thompson.
Wow.
So one road story I'll give you really quickly. This is Travis Waters. He's a bit of he's not quite the kind of mean-spirited river that Mike Roselli is, but he's a river. So one day on the road, he decided he was going to bake a bunch of X-Lax laced cookies and bring them on the road trip. And I guess if you look at the package, the X-Lax package, it says like have 1 cube of chocolate for fast, effective relief or whatever it says. So he put 6 into each cookie. And then we got to this venue, and he knew that there's just no way he could pass these cookies out. No one would eat them. So he went and got the old lady who kind of ran the building and said, "Look, listen, I want to pull a rib on these guys. Would you mind saying these are left over from your bake sale and bring them in and just ask the guys if they'll have these?" And I guess she looked him square in the eye and said, "Well, I'll do it." So fast forward, she comes into the dressing room after the show, says, "Boys, here's some leftovers from the bake sale." And wrestlers being wrestlers, Like apparently they're reaching over top of her before she can even put them down. Like they're grabbing these cookies.
Yeah.
And everyone had 2 or 3 or 4. And that night, normally we all go out. Well, nobody went out. Just Travis and I went out. No one else went. And
I spend my life
and then the next day, everyone's kind of together and we're all talking and no one's bringing it up. And so Travis decides he's going to open the floodgates. He said, guys, did anyone else have any trouble on the toilet last night? And Jesus, the whole room. Oh, are you kidding me? I didn't leave my room. I thought I was going to die. Everybody. And it was only because these guys were actually on their way to go and lynch the pizza guy who they assumed was responsible. Yeah. It was only because of that we actually had to come clean and say, wait.
Yeah.
You've been punked. Oh gosh! I mean, again, there's so many. I mean, there's the time. Are you guys familiar with Stuart Kemp?
Stuart Kemp. No, you have to give us a little bit.
Johnny Flash or Bulldog Bob Brown Jr. I think he's actually even wrestled, but he was a stagehand and a part-time manager, and he used to come on the road all the time. And he was one of those guys. I quite like Stuart. So if you're listening, Stuart, you're a lovely human being. But here, I'm going to tell this story about you anyway. He was one of those guys who didn't react to ribbing very well. So for any guys who are breaking into the business, this is the way. If you get ribbed, this is the way you react. You say, "Oh, good rib, you guys," and then you leave it alone. Yeah. Don't get really mad. Don't get bent out of shape. Don't throw a fit. Because if you do, it's guaranteed you're going to be the target of all ribs from then on in. Because that's, of course, for a guy who's ribbing, that's the reward, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
You flip out and make an ass of yourself. So if you do that, anyway, Stuart was one of those guys who always did that. He got really angry if you ribbed him. So one night I remember we had a show in Nanaimo, and he and his wife were staying in the second floor of this motel. And Mike Roselli and I got a little bit drunk and went back to his room at 3 in the morning and knocked on the door. And his first mistake was opening it. So we bulldogged in there, basically dragged him out of his room in his underwear and handcuffed him to the railing, on the second level of the motel. And then we left. We went and got something to eat at Denny's. So we came back, Jesus, it must have been 5 in the morning by this point, a couple hours later, and his wife had thrown him a pillow but nothing else. So he was sleeping in his underwear on the second floor of this motel, handcuffed. And Mike wouldn't release him until he said, that was a good rib, without freaking out. He freaked out, said, let me go, oh my God, you guys, I'm freezing out here, my wife is on And Roselli said, listen, as soon as you, in a calm, collected voice, look at me in the eye and say, good rib, Mike, I'm not letting you go. So about 10 minutes later, he did that, and we let him go.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
That was actually in the movie, believe it or not, but it was one of the things that was on the cutting room floor. Unfortunately, we just didn't really pull it off.
Wow. So, yeah, I bet there was like you were saying, I guess there was quite a bit that, you wanted to fit in there, but as we were talking in preparation for this interview about how you had to kind of draw the line between stuff that would go way over some people's heads and some stuff that only smart marks would get. And
did you watch the deleted scenes?
Actually, I don't have access to deleted scenes on my pirated version. So,
God damn it. Well, I tell you what, they're the best. That's the best part of the movie, really, is the deleted scenes. I'll tell you that now.
Okay. Well, when we get our official copy, which I hope will be on the way soon, we can go ahead and experience all of that.
We will get
Absolutely.
We'll get you your money fair and square, we swear.
And so that kind of leads me to an interesting question as far as, the making of the movie. Once again, we're talking about Kayfabe, the movie, and you can check it out. You can order it at www.kayfabeentertainment.com. I believe that is the website. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Kayfabemovie.com or kayfabeentertainment.com.
Yeah, and you go ahead and check it out and order it. Don't get it from an unknown source like we did. These guys spent a lot of time and effort into this movie, and it's really, really worth, you know, the money that you're going to end up paying out for it. So keep that in mind. What were some of the kind of tougher challenges as far as making the movie?
Well, the whole thing, like, movie making is no joke. I'll tell you something. It's an amazing experience. I mean, it's rewarding, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. But it's also the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Like pre-production, you got a million things you got to worry about. You got locations. You got, in the case of our movie, you've got hundreds of extras. You've got to somehow entice into a wrestling auditorium for a day or two. Yeah. You've got your casting. You've got all of your, obviously, your cinematographer and equipment, and you just got a billion things you have to worry about, including, it's funny, you know, we're already stressed to the max. I remember talking to this one experienced sound guy that we were going to hire, and he looked at us during this meeting where we're trying to convince him to work for us because he was taking a big pay cut, and he said, okay, I'm happy to work for you guys. I just want to put in one request. He said, please don't have spaghetti every day for everybody, okay? And he leaves the room. We're all like, oh, yeah, God, not spaghetti every day. He left the room, and we all looked at each other like, we have to feed these fucking people? Like, we didn't even think of that, right? Like, so Christ, we had to feed everybody, of course, for the whole shooting schedule, which was 10, 11 days. You've got to arrange breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's just, I tell you, it's a tough thing. And it's funny, each stage of filmmaking, you get through that stage, and you think while you're doing it, it's the hardest thing you'll do, but then you get to the next stage. So pre-production was brutal. We kept thinking, oh, I can't wait to get to the filming. That'll be fun. We got to filming. Well, that was 11 days of hell. You know, 16-hour days where you're running around looking after a billion things, and by the way, also acting in most scenes. You know, so that was a nightmare. And then finally we got to post-production, which I had no clue how much work goes into post-production in a movie. Like picture editing, we watched the movie probably 500 times during the picture editing, and then you get to sound editing, and congratulations, you get to watch the movie 500 more times because you know every sound has to be just right, and you have to fix all the sound defects, and you know it's just an amazing amount of work. And then finally you think you're done, you've got a movie. But then you got to promote it. You got to go to film festivals. You got to develop your poster and your marketing platform and do shows like yours. You know, I mean, I've done dozens of these, and that's par for the course. That's what you have to do when you make a movie. You know.
Wow, Chris, you have any other questions that pertain to the movie? Help me out here.
Yeah, no, actually I do. I mean, it's not exactly a production question. Well, I guess sort of it is. You mentioned earlier about the scene where Luperchuk was sort of explaining the whole gaffing thing. So, and obviously that, like you said, there was some makeup art with that. But you know, was that outside of that? You know, was it all, you know, special effects with the gaffing like during the matches, or did he actually?
Well,
do it?
I'll tell you this, and this is I've been asked the question whether he actually gaffed himself, and I'll give you this answer. We did 4 takes for that scene. The first 3 takes were special effect. The last take was not. The last take he gaffed himself. So based on that, I'm not going to tell you what one we used. see if you can tell by watching that scene which one we used, and you'd be surprised by the answer.
Really?
Wow.
See, I'm not going to lie. You know, I saw that. I was like, okay, I guess out of all the blading in the movie, that would have been the one that would have been fake. I mean, at least like when you guys are having the battle royal, and he's telling you guys back off. You know, I sort of assumed that was real because you know it pretty much. I mean, so this is sort of an assumption. Maybe you can correct me, but you pretty much what I'm guessing is you guys like shot the matches and then just kind of clipped them, or? Yeah. We basically we'd go and we would do a match tip to toe. And typically we'd end up doing it twice, and we basically just cut the matches from there. But then we also had the wrestlers communicating in the ring scenes, and we did those with no crowd, just in a sound studio. Uh-huh.
So anytime you kind of see the guys close up talking to each other,
right.
you'll notice that the camera angle is such that you can't see the crowd in the background. And because we knew it was going to be, those scenes are going to be tough to shoot with a room full of people because you need it to be absolutely quiet, right?
Right.
So it's, I tell you, it's an interesting business, film, and it's amazing amount of work goes into the smallest scene, and I found one of the hardest things about this movie, like, tip to toe before we edited it, it was about 3.5 hours long. So we cut 2 hours out. And it's hard because as a filmmaker, you know what certain scenes cost, right? So I tell you what, some of the most expensive scenes that we shot, we cut, and it kills you. But you got to keep the best stuff.
And keep the most stuff that makes the most sense as far as in the storytelling of
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
itself.
And there's certain things, you're right, like it's a good point. You have to keep certain things because it's story driven. And it kills you because it's weak compared to other stuff that you're cutting,
Wow. So, Chris, you want
you can probably hear the parties going like full bore in the background here. I apologize for that.
Oh, no, hey, it sounds like you're having fun. We won't keep you too much longer. Chris, you have anything else you want to add?
Actually, yeah. Do you guys have any plans on going from here? Maybe trying to option it for TV or?
Funny you should say that. We actually have maybe a deal with Comedy Central. We're going to be doing a half-hour television series based on the movie, and basically we'll just pick up where the movie left off. I believe it's going to be all the same actors and maybe a couple of new guys.
Cool.
Wow.
And it'll be like along the same lines as like a Trailer Park Boys, that kind of thing.
Oh, cool.
Wow. So hey, yeah, we have once again we have Pete Smith on the line, known in the wrestling career and in Kayfabe the movie as the Rocket Randy Tyler. We thank you so much for joining us once again. www.kayfabeentertainment.com. You can order Kayfabe the movie. And anyone that hasn't seen it yet, please go out and get it. It's an awesome movie. We can't even push it up enough. I feel like I'm doing a real weak job of plugging it, but
forget it.
I mean, seriously, it is great. And like I said, we have the trailer posted on our MySpace page and our website. You can go to YouTube and check out the trailer. If you're not quite convinced yet, just take one look at the trailer and you'll know that this is a movie that you got to see, a must-see for any wrestling fan. Pete, we thank you so much for joining us, and I guess we'll let you get back to your big party.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for all the kudos on the movie, and you got a great show there. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, no problem. Thank you. We'll hope to hear from you again soon.
All right, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care, Pete.